Hello, good evening and welcome. I'm Karima Brown and you're watching Political Exchange, where we unpack Africa's political economy. South Africa's largest labour federation, Cosatu, has been rent down the middle as leaders slug it out for control of the federation. The General Secretary, Zwelinzima Vavi, has been put on special leave pending the outcome of two separate investigations, one relating to his alleged activity in the sale of Cosatu's buildings, and the second, of course, to the sex scandal involving Vavi having sex with a subordinate at the premises in Braamfontein. Well, what does this all mean for Cosatu and, more importantly, for the Tripartite Alliance? Helping us to unpack these issues are my guests tonight. The first, of course, is Professor Friedman. He is from the Center for the Study of Democracy at the University of Johannesburg. And my second guest is Vukani Mde. He is an analyst at the consultancy Africa Practice. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the program. Professor Friedman, let me start with you. The Cosatu leadership goes into a special Central Executive Committee meeting starting today. Many issues on the agenda, but of course the fate of Zwelinzima Vavi very much on the agenda, against the background of court action to challenge the suspension. What do you think is going to be the impact of the court action on the deliberations? Is it going to make it worse for Vavi from Cosatu NOB's point of view, or do you think that they're going to put the brakes on the action?
Probably neither, Karima. I don't think this is about the court action. I should imagine the court action has mainly been brought in an attempt to actually get the put pressure on and get the issue resolved at a body like the CEC. I think the outcome of the meeting over the next couple of days may well depend on what the ANC is doing behind the scenes. Because quite clearly, whatever you think of Vavi's behavior towards a subordinate, I mean, this is about the division within Cosatu, about whether to move closer to the ANC or not. People in the ANC leadership may be uncomfortable with what Zwelinzima Vavi says in public, but they're perfectly well aware that Cosatu fighting among itself, among other things, is not going to be a useful ally in the election next year. So really the ANC has to weigh up the advantages of removing somebody who's critical of the leadership with the disadvantages of splitting Cosatu, even if it doesn't formally split. And it's got to work out how much influence it has within Cosatu. I think that's really going to be what settles the issue rather than court action.
Mm-hmm. Now, the idea or the public perception is that Zwelinzima Vavi, on the one hand, is the outspoken Cosatu leader, very critical of the government, very critical of Jacob Zuma's administration. The rest of the NOB is compliant, not really interested in taking the ANC on key economic and political questions on which they differ, whether it's the National Development Plan, whether it is the question on labour broking and so on. Is it as clear-cut as that, Vukani? And if it is as clear-cut as that, what is the ANC's game plan likely to be around the question of Vavi's suspension?
Probably not as simple and crude as all that. I think there are standing Cosatu resolutions on the policy issues that they ordinarily find themselves at variance with the ANC on. And almost all of Cosatu's NOBs and the leadership of the various affiliates are probably of one mind on those issues. What tends to rent them apart is how they take the ANC on. With one faction, the Vavi faction, believing that Cosatu needs to put all of its cards on the table. Be publicly honest and direct with the ANC, and others are preferring a more strategically or tactically nuanced way of taking the ANC on. Whether the ANC, I would guess that the ANC is probably aware of those nuances. They interact with Cosatu every day. They would know how much support. They would know where the tactical differences are inside Cosatu. The ANC needs to weigh up whether or not it is better to have Vavi inside Cosatu, urinating inside, or outside the alliance urinating inside. And frankly, it's hard to guess which way they are leaning. Mm-hmm. But this CEC, as well as what happens, what follows it in the coming weeks, will make the issue a bit more open.
Do you agree, Stephen?
Well, I agree up to a point. I think there are policy differences. I mean, if you look at, NUMSA has very explicitly endorsed nationalisation. That's not the policy of the NUM, for example. I think also the other thing on which, it's not only about policy issues. Something like the question of how do you approach an issue like corruption, for example. I mean, Vavi's way of approaching that is to go out onto the hustings and to say, very unpleasant things about the ANC. The other's approach may well be to say this is something which, we do behind the scenes and we don't discuss that sort of issue in public. I think that's the differences I would see it. But the question of which way the ANC is going to go, look, the only straw in the wind that I've seen, if you'd asked me this question a couple of days ago, my sense was if you read some of the things that Gwede Mantashe was saying, that, the ANC had decided that, they might as well get behind the people who were trying to remove Vavi. I did notice that, in the last day or so, Stuma Dlamini, the president of Cosatu, has now started to talk about perhaps it's possible to come to a compromise which won't necessitate court action, etc. And that may be a slight signal that there will be an attempt over the next couple of days to actually resolve this issue rather than simply to remove Vavi and take the consequences.
Vukani, the question of Zwelinzima Vavi's leadership of Cosatu is, of course, not just an issue that arises now. It was an issue that arose at the conference where it was decided behind the scenes that a contestation wouldn't be good for the federation, that it would rent the organization down the middle. And of course, we saw a couple of months later those very divisions that were kicked into touch resurfacing much uglier and right out into the public. Looking back now, and both of us were at that conference, would it have been tactically better to have a contestation and deal with the fallout as a consequence of that big contested battle for leadership? If one looks at where things are going now, or was the decision to kind of manage the leadership, which they got a lot of praise for at the time, a good thing?
Well, they got a lot of praise for that because at the time it looked like the wisest course of action. It looked like the only course of action to prevent further division in Cosatu and to prevent particularly public contestation and public divisions inside Cosatu. Obviously, with hindsight, it doesn't look. It may have been cleaner to actually have a contestation. It would have resolved the political issues underlying the current rupture in Cosatu. It would have allowed the ordinary membership to choose between the two visions of where Cosatu needs to go. But obviously, we say that with hindsight, knowing what has happened since that conference.
Now, Stephen, we know, of course, Cosatu has never been hegemonic, or rather about its political orientation, and neither can it be. It's a trade union formation. It's not a political organization. All sorts are there, but of course there's a constant contestation about political orientation. In one way, Cosatu has decided, because it's thrown in politically its lot with the African National Congress and the South African Communist Party. Many other union federations decide on a different course of action in terms of where their politics stand. What are the implications of this for the tripartite alliance on the one hand and the left project on the other?
Before I answer, just one response to your question to Vukani. I think the issue here is not whether there should have been a showdown, but where there should have been a showdown. You see, the point is that the Central Executive Committee consists of union presidents and general secretaries. A Congress consists of delegates elected by the membership. And that is why the demand of NUMSA and the demand of the pro-Vavi faction is for a Congress, because their sense is that Vavi has enough support among the general membership to win. So, I think that that's a very important issue. I mean, when we're saying, in principle, from a perspective of somebody who's concerned about union democracy, if we're saying that it should have gone to a showdown, then you've got to say that the membership has to decide through its elected delegates. And I think that's one of the points of contention. But I think that goes to the bigger issue that you're raising here. What does this mean for Cosatu and what does it mean for the alliance? Well, I think what it means for Cosatu is that what is coming to a head here is a process in Cosatu where up until a while ago, Cosatu, as you correctly say, has always had differences. They've been able to manage those differences. Long before Jacob Zuma beat Thabo Mbeki at Polokwane, Cosatu used to have open elections and nobody batted an eyelid. I think the problem in Cosatu is that the kind of tensions in the ANC have now seeped into Cosatu, so that Cosatu finds it more difficult to do that. And I guess if we're honest, which is a finger pointed at Zwelinzima Vavi, the problem started when Willie Madisha, as the president, was thrown out because he was on the wrong side of Polokwane. And I think that sent a very uncomfortable signal. There's nothing wrong with having divisions in Cosatu. The problem is that if you try to throw out the people who disagree with you. And I think that's what's being contested in Cosatu at the moment. As far as the alliance is concerned, I think, the ANC does not benefit from a Cosatu which throws out sections that disagree. The ANC does not benefit from a Cosatu which is at war itself. But in the short-term sense, the ANC goes into an election next year. Cosatu has always been a major source of canvassing and major source of organisation. Does it want to go into an election with a Cosatu which is at war with itself? I think
the Secretary General has clearly given the answer to that, and it's an emphatic no.
Well, of course not. Yes.
But what I wanted to come to, Stephen, is an interesting point, and I'd like to pick up with you about it and move to Vukani about it as well, is you were saying that the problems that the ANC has faced has now moved to Cosatu. And I want to ask a little bit more of a clarifying question, because I have always held the view that the so-called sins of incumbency that the ANC has to deal with subsequent to becoming a governing party, which is that its members have now got access to state largesse and infrastructure as a way of dispensing patronage, that problem, perhaps in a different way, manifest in Cosatu as well. Cosatu, companies have massive interests. Sitting on boards, means an extra 10, 15,000 rand sometimes in the pockets of individuals. We know, of course, of how someone's class position has changed when they become a shop steward, for instance, particularly in sectors such as the mining sector. We've criticized the ANC for being unable to deal with this because Cosatu often stands out as the voice that criticizes the ANC, even if it's from within the alliance. It has blinded us to the fact that Cosatu sits with the same problems and perhaps hasn't been able to deal with it sufficiently and as efficiently as one would have liked, Stephen.
I think that's entirely true. I mean, what we're talking about is a situation here in which we've got a highly unequal society, in which that inequality is still significantly racial, despite the fact that we've been formally a non-racial democracy for 20 years. And therefore, avenues specifically for black people who are trying to get into the middle class and the upper middle class are limited. And the ANC's problem, part of the ANC's problem, is that politics has become one of those avenues. Part of Cosatu's problem is that Labour has become part of those Sakela Bushlungu, who's an academic at the University of Pretoria, has been working on this for years and showing us that, as you correctly say, becoming a shop steward is a job. It's a job which gets you into the middle class. We've also got a young British researcher now who's showing how people use that job to then get into to management and into upper management, etc. So you have this distance. Really, the inequalities of the society are now being played out not only within the ANC, but within Cosatu itself, because, of course, the membership do not have those avenues into the middle class.
I see you shaking your head in agreement, Vukani.
Yes, but can I just, with your indulgence, Karima, bring us back to the Willie Madisha issue? I hear this precedent being quoted all the time, and the caveat that I would like to attach to this is that what happened before Willie Madisha was ousted was that Cosatu had a Congress in 2006 in which they took a resolution to go one way in the internal fights that was happening in the ANC at the time. They resolved to support Jacob Zuma. Now, Willie Madisha, as president of Cosatu, couldn't bring himself towards that view. He disagreed with a standing Congress resolution of Cosatu. That left Cosatu with no option but to look to get Willie Madisha out of the leadership. In a way, the Vavi situation differs in the sense that you cannot show Vavi to have gone against standing Cosatu resolutions.
Well, some of the Cosatu members involved in trying to oust him would disagree with you, but we have to pay the bills first. We're taking a short break. When we return, we will examine the question that Vukani has put on the table. Is Vavi at odds with the rest of his leadership, and was that position, particularly the position around whether Jacob Zuma goes for a second term in the ANC, articulated by Vavi? Many of his detractors argue not. Don't go away. We'll be back with you soon enough to take up these issues. Stay with CNBC Africa.